Hello everyone and welcome back to another Unreal Engine 5 tutorial. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this really nifty method that I've come up with for aiming and crosshairs. Now, I can't say with certainty that I'm the only person that's ever thought this up before, but I have searched for it and I have not been able to find this exact technique explained anywhere else. So if you have, you can let me know in the comments. But as you can see, I've set up a third-person character. I am using Unreal 5.7 for this purpose, but I brought in a character and I retargeted some animations. So as you can see, there is a normal unarmed state where she can walk and run and jump and do all those sorts of normal things. But if I press F, then she gets her weapon, and I've got this really cool crosshair. And it's some things about this crosshair that I want to show off in particular. Number one is that if I make large movements with my body, especially if I'm aiming, you can see the crosshair is going to have to try to keep up with wherever I think I'm aiming my weapon. And once I settle into a spot, it becomes perfectly aligned with the muzzle of the rifle in this case. One of the things that has generally irked me about other crosshair systems based on widgets is that usually you'll place the crosshair widget in the center of the screen and use the camera rotation to determine the projectile's rotation transform when it spawns. And for me, it always looks like it's misaligned with the weapon. However, you can see here that if I fire this, let me just settle it down a little bit. It's going to go exactly where the physical mesh of the weapon is pointed. All right. So I like that. It doesn't look like it's coming out at a weird, strange angle from the weapon. And I also like that when I'm not making these big movements, you can see that the animation, the natural sway in the animation is present, and that can make aiming even more challenging, which adds, in my opinion, it adds to the fun of it. One other thing I would like to point out is that I have found a way to make sure that this never will get lost behind any geometry. I know some people expressed concern over that possibility, and there is a technique that you can do, actually, believe it or not, at the shader level that will prevent that from happening in all cases. And the best thing of all is that this is fairly easy to implement. Now, I do acknowledge, however, that in this project, I've got different states. I've got retargeted animations and walking and running and different things about the armed state where I can be zoomed in or not, and various camera tricks going on. But you don't need to know how to do any of these things, including like aim offsets. I've got aim offsets, as you can see, for aiming purposes. Even if you don't know how to do any of those things, you'll still be able to learn this basic technique and then extend it back up to when you finally do acquire these particular skills. So with that in mind, let's move on to a more basic project where I can demonstrate this more easily. Okay, so we're back in a brand new Unreal Engine 5.7 project, and for this, I decided that the easiest way for me to teach this to you would be to use one of the first-person templates. But believe me, once you learn this in the first-person template, you will be able to extend it out into the third-person template in practically exactly the same way. All of these skills are going to transfer one-to-one. When I made this template level, I was sure to include the variant called, what is that variant? It's called the shooter variant. So just go under that variants tab in the project configuration and choose the shooter variant. Make sure that's in the project. When you open this up for the first time, you'll see that it's not much of anything. It's just an empty arena where you can run around and jump as a first-person character. But we want to load the level where there's enemies and rifles and things. So we're going to go here under Variant Shooter and double-click to load this map, the level Arena Shooter. So we'll go ahead and do that. And if I play this level, you'll see that we can look around and there's a little pistol right there. I look up there, there's another type of rifle. There's enemies that are out to get me. They're shooting at me right now, and there's another type of rifle here. All of these are weapons that you can pick up and shoot. And let me see if I can find this guy and shoot him. There's a basic, simple crosshair on the screen of the variety that you're accustomed to. That's going to be in the form of a widget, and it's right there in the center of the screen and has all of the problems associated with it that you'd normally encounter when making widgets in that way, such as misalignment, subtle misalignment with the direction that your muzzle might be facing in favor of the camera's rotation rather than the actual rotation of the weapon in the direction that it's facing. So the crosshair technique that I use solves those problems while making it a little bit more fun to play in the process. So the first thing that I think I want to do is to remove the crosshair. And if you wanted to, you could go here into the UI and locate the widget that contains that crosshair. I can see that it's right there. I could modify this, for example, just by deleting that and compiling and saving. Or I could find out where this is implemented by using the reference viewer. So I've right-clicked on the asset, and I can find the reference viewer and see where this has been implemented. It's in an interface here, but I can see that it's being implemented inside of the BP_shooter game mode. So if I browse to that, Control B, I can open that up. I don't need the reference viewer anymore, and I can see here is where that widget is being created and added to the viewport. I don't need that to happen at all, so I can just disconnect it from here and compile and save. Now, when I go back into play, I should not see that anymore, but everything else should still work. So I can still pick up a rifle and I can still shoot at my enemies, but there's no crosshair at all. Yeah, it's harder to aim with no crosshair. Good thing that these are Nerf darts. Okay. That'd be a good name to use for a game, Nerf darts. In any case, all of those different weapons that we see, there's a pistol, remind you, over here, there's this little pistol. Up there is another type of rifle, and here is more of like a machine gun type of one. They're all different skeletal meshes, but they're all managed by one parent blueprint class, which we can find here in the pickups directory. So just to get us there once more, under content, variant shooter, blueprints, pickups, and we can find the BP_shooter weapons base or weapon base. So I'm going to double click that to open it. And somewhere in here is our mesh. Actually, it's two meshes. We've got a first-person weapon and a third-person weapon. I'm not going to worry about the third-person one for the time being. And in fact, I could probably, I'm not going to delete that because our enemies are going to be using that. But we'll do this with the first-person weapon. I'm going to go ahead and attach a component to this. And we're going to click the Add button, and believe it or not, I'll be attaching a spring arm. Now, be advised that when you do this in the third person, there's already a spring arm, by the way, already a spring arm component in the default third-person blueprint. And it is connected to, I think, either the capsule or the character mesh and has the camera attached to it. So this is going to be in addition to that. So in the third-person game that I showed you initially, I already had the rifle mesh connected to the character using sockets on the skeleton. So I was able to actually see that in its list of components here in the character viewport. But in this case, this is not the character. This is a separate blueprint for the weapon. So we only have this one spring arm. And I want this to be a child of the weapon. So what I want to do now is, with that in view, I'll zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to rotate this, and not the weapon, excuse me, the spring arm. I'm going to rotate that 90 degrees so that it's pointing in front. And I'm going to translate it also to line it up so that it's just in front of the muzzle. Okay, get that lined up nicely. Okay, I can even make a smaller snapping increment here if I wish. Okay. And that's going to be really, really good. All right. Now I'm going to add yet another component. It's going to be a static mesh. And this static mesh is going to be the crosshair. Why is that not letting me type? Let me try that again. Here we go. And it's going to be in the form of a plane. Like so. A plane. And I want this plane to be a child of the spring arm, and I want it to attach to the spring arm's endpoint. The spring arm has a socket, so the crosshair will use the parent socket, which is called spring endpoint. The next thing we're going to need to do is rotate this so that it's facing 90 degrees, so it's facing towards us. Typically what I like to do as well is to highlight the spring arm, and I'll do a couple of things here. I usually set this to 1000 or 2000, that is to say the target arm length. Let's start with it at 1000. And it's pretty common that I will also make this smaller, that is to say the mesh, on every axis. So I'm going to say maybe 0.25. 0.25. Of course, I could have padlocked that. 0.25. I'll padlock it now in case we have to make any further adjustments later. And maybe we'll start with all three at 0.5. Not 5, 0.5. Okay, and we'll see how it goes. Next, we're going to want to make a crosshair material. So here is what I like to do for that. I'll make a new folder, and I'll just name it lazily Crosshair, and open that up. And I've got a folder here on my desktop where there is a PNG image that I made in Photoshop of a crosshair with a transparent background. And I exported that. Now there are tutorials for that sort of thing on YouTube, so I won't bore you with the Photoshop part, but if you decide you want to learn how to do that, there's plenty of tutorials. I'll also make sure that I provide a link to this PNG in the description for this video. And you want to open it up and make sure that it has that alpha, the transparency. And it's okay if this is black, because ultimately it's not going to appear as black. We can make this a different color if we wish. And I'm going to. In fact, I'm going to make it sort of an emissive blue in this particular circumstance. So to make this material, what I want to do is I'm going to make it kind of wrong, I think, to start with, just to make a point. So I'll right-click and create a material using this, and I'm going to call it m_crosshair. And this is not necessarily going to be like definitively wrong. It's just that it's going to have certain limitations. So let's make a texture coordinate. Multiplied by a scalar. Excuse me. I can just call that size. And set that to 1. It's doubtful that I'll change that anyway. And connect that to the UVs. So far, so good. I'm going to project this, by the way, onto a plane so we can see it. And what we could do at this point, if we don't want that to be black, we could use a desaturation node. And put it in line here. And we can promote this to a parameter, this fraction, and set that to 1. At least for the short term, that's going to be beneficial to us. Next, what I want to do is I want to multiply this. So I'll create a multiply node. by a constant 3 vector RGB out to define a new color for it. Let's say 1. And we're going to make that kind of a blue color. Well, yeah, the problem is that we're going to have to remove the alpha channel, make that the opacity mask. So let's go into the result node and change the blend type to masked here for just a moment. And we'll take the alpha channel and we'll plug that into the opacity mask. Now, if I were to increase this value, let's try 100. Or is it negative? Yeah, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. I had to do it to the negative in this case because in my previous attempts, it was a white outline. So experiment with positive and negative values there. So let's see, -1 might be not enough. -1, yeah, it's not enough. The docs will tell you to make sure that you use a value between 0 and 1. So that's 0. Here's -1. But I find -100 makes it even more blue, -500, even more solid blue, -1000, even more blue. Okay. And if I just wanted it a solid color, I suppose I could do that. But maybe I also want it to be emissive. So I can get a multiply node and also use that basic color with a scalar called emissive. Set to something bright. I don't know. Let's try 10 into the emissive color. And now I've got something emissive. So I can hit apply and save. Back in my weapon, that can become my material content. Crosshair. Here's my material. I can use that on the crosshair. And it will look like that. So let me compile and save what I have so far and play the game. So if I get this, you can see this is pretty much working. But depending on how long you make your spring arm, frankly, sometimes you'll see that that can get hidden behind other geometry. So one thing I would recommend that you do here in the material itself is change again the blend mode from masked and use additive instead. And here you might have to do -1 to sharpen that up when it's in additive mode and increase the emissive value to something higher, like 500. And you can also make it less opaque if you want it to be a little bit see-through, maybe 0.5 or something like that. That's up to you. But this is usually the material setup that I use, that I settle on for these crosshairs that I've been making. One other thing is that to prevent that from getting hidden behind other geometry, and this will always work, so I highly recommend that you do this. First step, change it to additive, make your adjustments in the material, and then look for depth test. Where it says disable depth test, you're going to want to set that to true. And apply and save. And you can make an instance if you want out of this, or dynamic material instance out of it, and do more fancy shader level stuff. But we're going to now go back into our blueprint where this is happening, and we're going to make some modifications on the spring arm. Specifically, we're going to look for collision and make sure that do collision test is set to true. And I usually set this to the visibility trace, but strictly speaking, I don't think it matters that much. You could probably try it both ways and see if one way is less jumpy than the other for you. And I also like to use camera lag. So I'll enable lag on this and turn on camera lag and set all 3 of these to on, not the debug markers, I beg your pardon. And I usually go for a lag speed of around 3, a rotation lag of about 3 as well, and a distance lag of about 200 units or so. And lastly, I'm going to search for inherit, and I'm going to disable inherit role. So what will happen by disabling inherit role is that later when you're using blend spaces, you don't want to see your crosshair sort of tilting to the left or tilting to the right. And that can happen when you're aiming in different directions and your spring arm is following. So let's just make sure that this is intersecting right in the middle, and it doesn't look like it is. So let's just go back to the crosshair mesh and make sure that its transform is zeroed out. I can see the location is not. So let's zero out the location. And again, make sure that it's right where it's supposed to be with respect to the spring arm. That's got to be going right through the middle. We did have to rotate it on purpose 90 degrees. And I accidentally did that on the spring arm, you see, and not the mesh. I meant to do that on the mesh. So let's go to the crosshair mesh, and that's going to be negative 90 here, and that's going to be positive 90 here. Just getting it lined up exactly right. And we'll double check that this is right at the weapon muzzle. And I don't think that could possibly be better. So at this point, if I compile and save and play the game, I should now have this crosshair on any weapon that I pick up. It looks like I see what's happening. The opacity is not being rendered properly. So let's go back into that material and see what I missed. I forgot to connect the alpha channel to the opacity override. That was needed. And let's see if this can be cleaned up with about 0. I think 0 is going to be it. And we're going to increase this to some very high value, such as 1000. -1. We might not even need the desaturation at all, come to think of it. Okay, let's see how this looks. I'll get this little pistol here. And should be able to shoot right at anything. And notice that no matter how close I get to any particular piece of geometry, I can't make that go behind it. It is, however, colliding in ways that I don't want. So in order to remedy that problem, we're going to go into that blueprint one last time, and on the crosshair mesh, we're just going to disable collision. So let's go and set this to no collision. And again, that is on the crosshair plane. Compile and save. And I think also that I would like to reduce the scale or maybe increase the target arm length. Let's do that. Let's go to the spring arm and make that set to 2000. And that way it'll be able to line up with things close and far. So let's get a rifle this time. Want to try to kill these guys. Okay. And you can see that it is going to snap to nearby geometry. And even if I get really close, I cannot make this crosshair plane disappear behind any obstructing mesh. And it will go quite some distance, as far as your spring arm is, and self-adjust according to what it is in front of. And notice that the bullets are automatically aligned, okay? And we're getting that little shake, of course, because that's in the animation. All right. So that's basically what I did in the other project. Of course, I just have some circumstances where I don't want the crosshair to be visible, so I'm controlling that with some blueprint scripting and some camera moves and things of that nature. And I'm going to take you back over to that project right now just to prove to you that this also works in that context. Okay, so we're back once again, and I'll remind you what this was like. We've got our character and this really crazy outer space type of platform. And she's got a very similar looking crosshair. I think I made this on a different day or I don't remember where I got this one, but it's the same kind of deal. It's just a transparent background type of crosshair image. And you can see that when she's not armed, of course, I have to hide that, so you can't see it. So that's part of the scripting. And everything else really is the same, except for the fact that the rifle in this case is not a separate blueprint. I have this attached to sockets. Come on, boom. I have that attached to sockets on the skeleton of the character. So if I go to that character, let's see, third person, I have a character set up called Cyberpunk Girl, which is the name of that model. Yeah, there's a lot of scripting going on here for camera adjusting and firing and toggling the aiming modes and things like that. But if I go to the viewport, right now, because the character defaults to her non-aiming mode, or her unarmed, I should say, mode, I've got this rifle attached to a socket on the back. But that's a component, right? That component is right here, okay? And it's a child of the mesh. And in script, at a certain point, I attach this component to another component, which is another socket on the body, namely a socket on the hand where the weapon is held. But to get my spring arm lined up with this, what I did is I took the character mesh out of its animation blueprint here for a moment, where it says animation mode, and chose use animation asset, and just found something where it was standing still. And when I went to place the spring arm, all I had to do was spin it around like I did in the example in the first person level, and attach the mesh at the end of it at the spring arm endpoint. I did have to rotate that. And again, I made that material just to make sure that this would never get hidden behind any other level geometry. So when she goes back into her animated state where she's arming the weapon, this same setup is now reparented to the socket on her left hand, which is the location where that is being held. So I can actually prove that as well. So let's go to, I'm going to put that back into its animation blueprint. But if I go to the skeletal mesh and look at the skeleton, you can see that I've got one socket here on the left hand and another socket here on the back. And it's just attached component to component in the blueprint scripting at the right time with the press of a button, and I can make them go back and forth when necessary. And the implementation is just in the script. So now that's what's happening when I play the game. And I press F for fighting. Attach component to component. It goes into her left hand, and I'm showing the crosshair in this mode. And again, that cannot go behind any other geometry that's in the way because of the way we set up the blend mode and set the disable depth test to true. So the blend mode, once again, is additive, and disable depth test has to be set to true. Otherwise, you risk getting close to something and the crosshair might actually disappear into, or perhaps even behind, a mesh that could be in front of it. But this absolutely takes care of that in all cases and is a lot of fun. Boom. Okay, well, I hope you learned something from this tutorial, and thanks for checking it out. And by the way, the camera lag is optional. Even if I did not have that camera lag, as a matter of fact, I can disable that right now if you want to see. If I go to that spring arm, oh, and I am using a scene component, by the way, that is also near the muzzle and using its, its transform properties for like the rotation of the projectile. But anyway, the spring arm here, if I go to lag, I can disable the lag, and therefore any movement is going to be strictly determined by the animation. So I'll show you what that's like as well. So some people might prefer that, right? It's not lagging, At least it's not supposed to be lagging. Did I get the wrong spring arm? Let me see. It is that spring arm. Oh, rotation lag. I left that on by mistake. So now it should not lag at all. But we'll still have the sway based on the nuances of the animation. So you've got to aim carefully. But it's not going to trail the weapon as I move it around. I like the lag personally, because when you settle into place, it still will do this as long as you're not making large body movements. So let's reinstate that one more time. Go into the blueprint, turn those on, and it remembers my values. Didn't remember the lag distance, so I'll set that to 200. Compile and save. So you can see as I slow down, it still follows the animation, but if I make big body turns, I kind of have to wait until it settles into place before I feel like I'm actually aiming. If I was making a big body movement in real life, I'd probably have to concentrate and steady myself a moment. And that's sort of, in my imagination, what that sort of simulates. All right, so I hope you appreciate this technique, and we'll get a lot of use out of it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you again next time.